evening. Welcome to Talkin Baseball, the show in which we talk about baseball. Hello, I'm Pete Lincoln.
I'm Jason Smith, co-host.
And we're here with our last episode of the season because the playoffs are going to begin a week from today.
1 week from today.
About a week. And by the time this makes the air, I'm sure the playoffs will be underway.
So this is just to get everyone out there in TV land ready for another great round of playoffs, which it always turns out to be, for us anyway, the most exciting time of the year. Even if the Red Sox aren't in it, it's still great to watch great teams go against each other, and you never know what's going to happen. I mean, how many times have we actually picked the World Series winner right at the beginning of the year? Almost never.
Almost never. So what we thought we might do for a show is talk about the fact that there have been 42 postseason games concluded with a walk-off home run. Pretty remarkable. Actually, in postseason play, there have been 2,208 home runs, and a great majority of those have been fairly recently, because up until the 70s, there were only 7 postseason games maximum.
Yep.
Now there are 40. So there's 5 or 6 times more playoff games than there used to be, so obviously there's going to be a lot more.
Extra rounds, wild cards, all kinds of crazy, and it used to be, even when the division series started, that was a best of 5.
That's right.
And that got expanded to a best of 7 it's in the 80s, mid-80s it finally expanded out. So just a lot more opportunities. So a lot of these things we're talking about are obviously recent because there's more opportunity for something like that to happen.
That's right. And just a few trivia before we get to the key trivia tonight.
Oh, sure. So we're not going to have you list all 42 walk-off postseason homers. If you can do that, you can co-host with us next season.
Take over.
Yeah, take over, yeah. But the first question is, who is the all-time leader in postseason home runs? So ponder that one. And then question number 2 is actually a 2-part answer. There are 2 people ever who have hit a postseason walk-off homer twice.
2 times.
So run those through your mind. No Googling, of course, as always. And you might know the answer. Don't say you don't know, because you might know it, because they're certainly familiar names to these answers. That's a hint. So
just a few other trivia we'll give you. The Yankees have hit 11 of the 42 postseason walk-offs. As you might figure, they have the most opportunities. 17 of those have come in the 9th inning and 25 in extra innings. There's only been 3 of the 42 that were hit with the team trailing. So the team was losing the game, but the walk-off home run cinched it. And 7 were hit by Hall of Famers to be, and 3 were off Hall of Famers to be. Interesting, huh?
yeah.
So what we thought we would do is take, of those 42 walk-off home runs, a walk-off, for you that don't know, is simply a home run that wins the game. That was coined, interestingly,
Bye.
by Dennis Eckersley. In 1988, he was in the postseason. We'll have more to say that in a little while.
Sure will.
And he was being interviewed by an announcer, and he says, well, there are street homers, and there are walk-off homers. What he meant by a street homer was one that barely climbed over the fence, just barely made it. But a walk-off homer, he intended to mean the pitcher walked off the field in shame because it's been given up by the pitcher. As a pitcher, he would know that.
Yep.
And that particular game, he really knew it.
Oh, yeah. And what's the first thing they show after they show the batter celebrating, running around the bases? They show the pitcher walking off with the head hung. Yeah.
But it's come now to mean a very celebratory thing. A walk-off hit, and especially a walk-off homer, and especially a walk-off homer in the postseason, is really celebratory.
Yeah, and it's so exciting to watch stuff like this happen. I mean, and if you go through the list, there are actually some nobodies there. A lot of it was just an opportunity, and somebody hit one out at a certain point, and many you probably never heard of, actually.
But 7, as we said, were hit by Hall of Famers.
And I'm sure you'll probably know all 8 of the ones that we're going to run down. They're pretty famous. You know.
Actually, there is an article I've read, come across, that ranks all 42. We thought we would just take the top 8 and pick the top 8, in our opinion,
Sure.
The ones that had the most impact, or for one reason or other are the most memorable. Most of these are pretty iconic moments.
Sure. Yeah, you'll still see them on MLB Network and ESPN as
right.
just iconic baseball moments.
And we've been able to locate a YouTube clip of each of these. So you'll be able to see all 8 walk-off homer.
And maybe you were watching some of them. Who knows? I mean, out there, they've all happened in my lifetime, except for one. All but one have happened in my lifetime, and there was one that I was kind of too little to watch, but I believe I saw 6 of the 8 happen, which is kind of cool. So you've seen them all. So
Well, I'm phenomenally more old than you
yeah,
are.
just not phenomenally, just a little bit. But
So why don't you start with
yeah,
number 8?
so the first one we're going to kick off with is something that we hope everyone out there in TV land saw. This is Game 4 of the 2004 ALCS. And it was on October 17th, and we'll set the scene for you for this. The Red Sox had lost the first 3 games of the ALCS to the Yankees, including a Game 3 where they got slaughtered 19-8, which I had the non-privilege of going to that game. Probably the lowest point in franchise history. So Game 4 comes along, and this is important because this happens sometimes too. How a series happens a lot of the time is due to fortuitous or unforeseen circumstances. There was a rainout in the middle of that series. Game 3 was rained out and everything was pushed back a day. So our tickets were originally for Game 4, but we ended up going to Game 3. But what that did is they were the first 2 games of the series, and then 3 through 7 were 5 days in a row, which came into play very much in that series. But Game 4, the Red Sox were losing 4-3. As we know, that was the game Derek Lowe started, did a great job. And Mike Timlin came in out of the bullpen in the 6th inning, and have to give Terry Francona credit for this. Maybe one of the best managed games I've ever seen. Brilliantly brought in Keith Foulke in the 7th inning as his closer. Foulke went 2 2/3 shutout innings in that game, and another brilliant move that Francona did here. The Red Sox were losing 4-3 heading into the 8th inning. Torrey brings in Mariano Rivera to also pitch the 8th. People forget about that. He was going for a 2-inning save. So Rivera comes in the 8th, gets the Red Sox out, and Francona tells Foulke and Veritek to stall, to try to ice Rivera. And it worked. That top of the 9th inning, I think, went almost half an hour. And I think he only gave up a leadoff walk and then got the next 3 guys out. Every pitch they were conferencing and messing around and doing whatever. And so the bottom of the 9th rolls around half an hour later. Rivera comes out and immediately walks Millar on 4 pitches. Roberts comes in, steals the iconic stolen base in Red Sox history, steals second. Miller gets the hit up the middle, and Roberts scores, and the game's tied 4-4. So the Red Sox were 1 inning away from being swept, not just 1 game, 1 inning. And I think you might have heard me, I probably heard you too. I think all of New England, when Roberts scored, there was this sort of primal scream that came out from the New England area. And it wasn't that they still could have lost, but they were going to go down fighting. They weren't just going to roll over. They tied the game off Rivera, and all of a sudden it's a new game. The game rolls on to the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, each one rising our collective blood pressures, especially when Curtis Laskanik comes in the 11th inning with the bases loaded and gets Bertie Williams to fly out. And in case you forget his name, Laskanik, I think, was the last guy they had in the bullpen. They didn't have anyone else out there. So he gets Williams to fly out with the bases loaded. The Sox don't score. He comes out in the 12th and gets the Yankees out in the 12th. And we're saying, oh my God, what happens if they don't win the game here? Because they have no one left in the bullpen. So in the 12th, Yankees bring in Paul Quantrill, who had a great year, actually. He had a very good middle relief year. But again, hearkening back to circumstances, the Yankees' bullpen that year was pretty fried apart from Rivera. I mean, if there was one criticism of the Joe Torre era, it's that he rode his early relievers really hard. Scott Proctor might come to mind. And Quantrill comes in, man, he gets a hit to lead off the inning, and Papi crushes one into right field. The Red Sox win 6-4 in the 12th inning, and that set into motion the whole rest of the series. From that moment on, the series just took on a different tone. The Red Sox started playing differently. That was the moment that just changed the entire series. And from that point on, you said, okay, they can win this.
Yeah. And you think if he hadn't hit the home run and they had lost, it would go down as one of the worst World Series the Sox could possibly have played.
Sure.
They were destroyed in the 3rd game.
Oh, yeah.
And this game, who knows how it might have turned at any point. But once he hit that home run, that per se just made it 3-1 Yankees.
Okay, 3-1 we
But-
can come down from,
But
yes.
as it turned out, it became the prelude to 3 more wins, and so that's why we rate it so high, because it ended the curse.
It was the beginning of the end of the curse, and just of the next 4 nights, like I was saying, I may have been the most brilliantly managed 4 games I've ever seen by a manager. Frank Hona was brilliant starting in Game 4, the whole rest of the series. And interesting note, that was Curtis Leskanic's last game of his career. How cool is that? He knew he was done. His arm was just in pieces, and he said, "I'm just going to give it all I have." And it's the last time he ever appeared in the majors was that game. So that's number 8 on our list, which I'm sure most of you saw, and probably still remember fondly right now, 11 years later.
And I must say, we're not being homers about
No,
this,
not
because
at all.
most of the lists I've seen have also included that, certainly within the top dozen anyway, but it's our show, so we'll move that.
We're gonna bump it up a little bit.
Ortiz in the deep right field. Back is Sheffield. We'll see you later tonight.
So, number 7. Number 7 goes back to October 14th of 1976. This was a playoff game, an AL championship game, between the Yankees and Kansas City. And this particular home run in this particular series isn't noteworthy especially. What I want to talk about is what happened when the home run was hit. The game was played at night. They were late at night, and the game dragged on and on and on. It had begun with a 2-run home run by John Mayberry, but New York had come to and taken the lead 6-3 going into the top of the 8th inning. But George Brett tied it up, a 3-run homer, and the series was 2-2, and the Yankees were on tenterhooks about this. Chris Chambliss led off the last of the night at 11:45 at night. The Yankee fans were nervous, and they probably had been imbibing more than just a bit. Mark Lytle, who was a very, very good reliever for Kansas City, threw a meatball to Chambliss, who with this high, lofting fly toward the short porch in right field, and it just inched over the wall.
It was a Bucky Dent shot.
Bucky just barely cleared it. And the fans poured, and I mean poured en masse out into the field. Chambliss made the mistake of sort of standing there because he couldn't tell for sure whether it was going to be caught, so he was either going to be caught or be a home run, so sprinting really didn't make a difference. So we got a little late break heading to first base. By the time he hit second base, the field was littered with fans. And when you see this clip, his journey around the field was like a Marine training corps film. Knocking people down, he went down on one knee, he knocked people out of the way. And as he rounded third, it was evident he was never going to be able to touch home plate. So he sort of ran out of the base path and headed as hard as he could. He nailed one guy and flattened him right flat on his back and just fled in terror into the dugout. And of course, New York is going berserk because they won the pennant, the championship series. When he was in the dugout, one of his teammates came up to him and said, "You never touched home plate." So he got a couple of cops, and they went out and pushed people aside and got to home plate, but home plate had been stolen. It wasn't there. And so he just sort of touched the area where home plate had been. And afterwards, the league passed what they called the Chris Chambliss rule. He said if the game ends and the player is not able to reach first or cross home plate or end up doing a bonehead Merkle play like happened in 1912, the league will accept that as a run scored. And so while it was a terrific home run to hit, it's his peregrinations around the diamond.
The journey
That's what I
afterwards.
wanted to talk about. It's what makes this one of the classic home runs ever hit in postseason.
And that was kind of just in the 70s. They really beefed up the security as it headed into the 80s.
Well,
and
Red Sox
yeah.
fans will remember how Jim Lomberg was mobbed
Oh,
and his
sure.
clothes were ripped off in '67.
Sure.
Now, you cannot get onto the field afterwards. I remember one postseason where the umpires were grabbing the hats off the players as they were celebrating. So that doesn't happen anymore. But in 1976, it was quite a classic, chaotic moment.
And that was the whole stretch where 4 times in 5 years the Royals and the Yankees met in the championship series. And the Yankees won the first 3, and finally the Royals beat them. But that was the big rivalry back then. Actually, the Royals and Yankees hated each other then. They met every season.
And George Brett's famous pine tar
Oh, yes,
bat thing
sure.
happened along the way too.
Sure. Yeah.
Art Littell delivers high drive, hits it right center field.
That's gone.
It is gone.
Chris Chambliss has won the American League pennant for the New York Yankees. A thrilling, dramatic game with overtones of that great 6th game in the World Series a year ago, and then the 7th game too. What a way for the American League season to end. A spunky young Kansas City team. Look at them mob Chris Chambliss. What a season he has had. What a series he has had.
So moving on to number 6. This doesn't have as many pleasant memories for Red Sox fans as my last one did. But we feel it should be here because when you think of postseason home runs, good or bad, this is one that jumps right to mind. And I probably only need to say the date of this, October 16th, 2003. Yes, we all remember this date. This was the famous, all you need to say is it's the Pedro game. It was Game 7 of the 2003 ALCS, and the Red Sox, after Game 5, were losing 3-2. They came back and won Game 6. And again, coming into play here, there was a rainout. So the last games 4 through 7 were played 4 days in a row, which was key into what would happen here. So the Red Sox won Game 6 in a slugfest. I believe it was 9-6 they won Game 6. Came back, had Pedro going in Game 7. Pedro was absolutely lights out for the early innings. The Red Sox crushed Roger Clemens, knocked him out. I believe it was in the 3rd inning they knocked him out of the game. They got 4 runs off him, and a complete unsung hero in this game. Mike Mussina came out of the bullpen on 2 days rest and pitched 3 shutout innings to keep the Red Sox right at 4 runs. Pedro was brilliant the first 7 innings. Jason Giambi had hit 2 solo homers. Those were the only runs he gave up. And it was clear in the 7th inning that he was tiring. The Yankees had actually loaded the bases in the 7th inning. And Alfonso Soriano had struck out with the bases loaded, and Soriano never hit Pedro, so that was kind of a given he was going to get him out. But Pedro comes back in the dugout, is spent. And he says, he admitted this later on, he said, I thought I was done. Yeah. Poppy hits a home run in the top of the 8th. Should have been a triumphant moment in Red Sox history to make the game 5-2. And Grady comes up, Grady Little, the Red Sox manager, says to Pedro, I need one more out of you. So Pedro goes back out to start the 8th inning. Gets the first guy out, Nick Johnson. Always a tough out, by the way. Right. Pedro said he was the toughest out in that lineup because he was great at working deep counts. It took him 8 pitches to get Johnson out, and then the wheels came off. Gives up 4 straight hits. The Yankees tie the game at 5-5, and the iconic vision of that is Posada hitting the double down the line and getting into second base and going like this, and Yankee Stadium is going nuts. Grady finally pulls Pedro after the Yankees have tied the game. And nobody scores in the 9th, nobody scores in the 10th, and in the bottom of the 11th, first pitch Tim Wakefield throws. Actually, he did pitch a shutout 10th. People forget that too. But the first pitch of the 11th inning, Aaron Boone, of all people, who didn't even start the game, hits a homer into left field, and the Yankees win the game and the series. Win the game 6-5. Mariano Rivera goes 3 shutout innings to end the game, which if it had gone another inning, I think the Red Sox would have won because they had nobody left. I think they had Gabe White still in the bullpen, and he was the only one. And they had fried their starters. Mussina and Wells had both pitched in relief in that game. In fact, Wells gave up Ortiz's homer. So that's sort of, at the time, I mean, 2004 hadn't happened yet, but at the time, that was the quintessential Yankees-Red Sox moment. The Red Sox pull so close, and the Yankees always come back just to take victory away from them. And that was sort of the apex of the Yankees have the Red Sox number was the 2003 ALCS. Now, interestingly, when you look back at it, and hindsight is always 20/20 here. The popular cry at the time was Timlin in the 8th, Williamson in the 9th, and the Red Sox would have had it. Well, in hindsight, it wasn't that easy. We didn't know this at the time. Scott Williamson could barely pick his arm up.
Right.
And he had off-season surgery, and he pitched very briefly, tried to come back, but he basically never pitched again because his arm was in tatters. Alan Embry had pitched an inning and 2/3 the night before, and it appeared in Game 5 before that. He would have been in his 3rd day in a row. Timlin was fairly fresh. He hadn't appeared in Game 6, but backing them up was Bronson Arroyo, who hadn't established himself yet. It was his first year with the Red Sox, and he wasn't turned into that dependable starter that he would turn into the next year. And the last two guys were Scott Sauerbeck and Todd Jones, who each retired exactly one batter in the entire series. So there really weren't a lot of options. I mean, you know,
The option was to have taken Pedro out after that first
exactly.
time. And that's what's gone down in
exactly.
history.
Yeah.
Because he never should have gone out in the 8th anyway. They had people in the bullpen. And they had 5. I remember when Ortiz hit that home run.
We said that was it.
There's no way this staff is going to give up 3 more runs. But they left him in, and he came out after the first couple of hits. When Matsui, I think Matsui hit the one down the line.
Yes, he did.
Posadas was that.
Posadas was the blooper. That's correct. Yes.
But he could have pulled him then, and that cost him his job.
Yep. Absolutely.
And it just put Aaron Boone right in the pantheon of Yankee villains that were nobodies. In fact, Aaron Boone is now a staple on a network
commentator.
Commentator.
Yeah.
That's all he ever did.
Yep. So it was the best at bat of his career.
Bucky Dent and Aaron Boone.
Yeah.
You know.
So the fault wasn't necessarily that Pedro came out for the 8th, is that he left him in too long.
Left him in after
and
that.
you know what? If you can't get the last 5 outs out of a bullpen, you probably don't deserve to win anyway.
right.
So
And interestingly, the Yankees fried their pitching staff because they went down to the Marlins in the World Series. I
Yeah.
always thought the Red Sox would have massacred the Marlins.
Well, as I said, they used 3 of their starters in Game 7, so they had nobody left. And the Marlins beat them in 6, thanks to Josh Beckett. Thank you very much. Even though that's not a good one, that absolutely should be on the top list of postseason home runs.
Okay, so to watch and weep.
Yes. Don't enjoy, just watch.
In the 8th inning, leading by 3 as Boone hits it to deep left. That might send the Yankees to the World Series. Boone, a hero in Game 7.
Well, let's go right from that
Yes.
to just exactly the opposite. This was Game 6 of the 1975 World Series on October 21st of 1975. This has become probably the most well-known baseball game ever played all the way through because so many things happened in this. And this game, and this series overall, is credited with restoring baseball across the country. They just lived through this miserable strike. A lot of places never really came back to full attendance, but this was such a classic baseball game with both sides having iconic moments, and then finally, by the ultimate iconic moment, that the game, this is probably, if you want to send one game to Mars or to some other planet to explain our history. This was also a game which had been delayed a couple of days by rain. It had rained out, I think, 2 days in a row, right? Before this game was finally played. The Red Sox were down 3-2. There had been some great games up to that point. But Cincinnati had a phenomenal team. They called them the Big Red Machine. But even though they were the Big Red Machine, they had not won a World Series since 1940. So they were in a 28-year drought themselves, quite a long time. They talk about the Red Sox 86-year drought. They were in quite a lengthy drought, even though they had such a strong team. And the thing about this game that always amazes me is how many future Hall of Famers played in it.
Oh, yeah.
A lot from Cincinnati, but some from the Red Sox too.
Sure.
And just to recap real quick, Cincinnati had won the AL West by 20 games. And that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then they knocked Pittsburgh out in 3 games in the championship. The Sox had won by 4.5, and they'd also beaten Oakland 3-0. So 2 good strong teams meeting each other. And this game started, it was a night game. Freddie Lynn hit a 3-run homer in the last of the first inning. And Tiant was pitching well in the game well. But he gave up a hit or 2 in the 5th inning, and then Fred Lynn missed a ball, almost killed himself. Yeah. And then they got a couple more in the top of the 8th inning. Cesar Geronimo hit one around the pesky hole and made it 6-3. We're gonna go down once again, just like last year, even it was a little closer. But then Bernie Carbo hit a miracle home run, a pinch hit home run, in which he looked terrible against their best reliever, Raleigh Eastwick, I think his name was, and tied the game up. He flew around the bases.
And they show him going like this as he's crossing the home plate.
He was stoned out of his gourd.
It was crushed dead center field. He crushed it.
And then in the last of the night, the Sox got the bases loaded, and there was a fly ball hit down the left field line, which George Foster caught and threw home. Supposedly Don Zimmer was screaming, "No, no, no," but Doyle thought he was saying, "Go, go, go," and was thrown out at the plate. So it was a double play in the last of the ninth, and the game went on into the 10th, and on into the 11th, past midnight. Well, coming up the bat, the last of the 12th inning, was Carlton Fisk. And Carlton lofted one toward left, right toward what's now called the Fisk
Now
pole.
called that.
And it just hooked and hit the netting and fell down. The Sox won the game. But what made this the most iconic moment was that a cameraman, one article I've read said he was standing on top of the left field wall. The other said he was behind the left field wall. And I think that's probably the correct one.
Probably,
Shooting
from
out,
the angle.
they'd never done that. They didn't have this many cameras on a World Series before. They had multiple cameras, and one camera remained on Fisk as he waved the ball there, like magic, made like a boulder, sort of moved like this, waved it, and it caught the net, and he leaped high in the air. And in the replays, they didn't show it originally, but in the replays, they showed this happening. It was just such an amazing moment, because cameras, now when they show the pitcher watching off, they show the fans going berserk, they show the manager cheering and the other manager not cheering, multiple cameras all over the place. But this is the first time it isolated on the reaction that a professional baseball player had on something that he had done that was so terrific.
And it was a great shot because he's in the foreground going like this, and when the home run happens, he throws his arm out. I forget who was on deck. Whoever's on deck does the same
Fred
thing.
Lynn.
It was Lynn who was on deck. Yes.
Fred Lynn had said to him, "You get on,
that's
I'll
right.
knock you in."
That's right.
I'll knock you in.
And in the background, the lighting wasn't great, but you could see all the fans doing this. It was like this massive arms up in the air moment that everybody did at the same time. It was great.
Now, of course, the Sox went on to lose the series, and it's only rated number 5 because of that. If they won the series, or that had won the series, it might have been number 1.
Sure.
But since they didn't, it's just the fact that has become almost synonymous with baseball, and you can't see a picture in the Hall of Fame of someone doing this without thinking of that moment.
And it was just the pinnacle of so many great moments. Carbo's homer, Evans' catch.
Oh, Evans' catch, I did mention
Dwight
that.
Evans' miracle catch where he got a double play out of it. You know, Louis Tiant going on 3 days rest and just having nothing because he'd thrown a complete game the game before. You know, the Reds bringing in the parade of relievers that they couldn't touch. It was just, every single moment of the game was just wonderful.
It's generally regarded as the greatest baseball game ever played.
Yeah. And that was the national audience, and that's what brought America back to baseball, was that game. And I think Game 7 was the highest rated game ever after that, because everybody came back and watched
And
it.
it had to be, somewhat of a downer after that, because what could match that in those circumstances?
Nothing.
In fact, it was won on a little silly blue pit.
Bye, Joe Morgan. Anyway, enough about him.
So anyway, enjoy this clip.
Yes.
And we'll take you out of the doldrums of the last clip.
Yes.
Pat
Matt Darcy, the Reds' 8th pitcher of the game, delivered his second pitch.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
The Red Sox won it. Fisk was forever a hero, and the moment was one of the most dramatic in World Series history.
Go ahead.
So moving on to the next one. Speaking of great World Series, this one comes from the 1991 World Series, which if you ask most baseball experts is the best World Series ever played. It was between the Braves and the Twins, and just for some background, no team had ever gone from last place to first place until this year, and the Braves and Twins both did it, and then they met in the World Series. If you were a betting person, you would have won millions if you put money on these two in the World Series. And it was the most evenly matched World Series I think that's ever happened. 5 of the 7 games ended in the last at bat. 4 of them went extra innings. There was only one blowout game in the whole thing, and when that happened, Game 5, it was like, oh, thank God, I don't have to have a heart attack tonight watching this game. But this comes from Game 6. It was on October 26, 1991, and it was in the Metrodome, which doesn't exist anymore, thank God. And the Twins were down 3-2. The Twins had won the first 2 games at home. Atlanta won the next 3 in Atlanta, which was no surprise because the Twins had the best home field advantage in the majors at that time with the Metrodome. The same when they won the World Series in '87, the same thing happened. They won all the home games and lost all the road games. But the Twins were down 3-2, and Kirby Puckett comes up before the game to the team and he says, "Guys, let me carry you on my back tonight."
Right.
And he did. He was the heart and soul of the Twins at the time, and there was sort of this. They were sort of this team in transition. They had a lot of kind of flotsam and jetsam from other teams, and a lot of guys that had come up, through their own system that hadn't made their names yet. Guys like Chuck Knobloch and Dan Gladden, who would be famous later on in their careers. But Puckett took over Game 6, and in the 3rd inning of Game 6, there was a long drive out to center field, and only in the Metrodome would this have been such an iconic moment. It was a combination field, combination baseball, football, and it was horrible for baseball. So they created this center field wall with plexiglass coming up above the wall so the players wouldn't die if they dove into the stands after a ball, or people wouldn't fall out onto the field. And Puckett jumped against the plexiglass as high as he could go. He was only about 5'5". I think he was pretty little, but as high as he could go, and just caught this ball against the plexiglass. I believe it prevented 2 runs. I think there were 2 runners on base, and threw the ball back in, and nobody ended up scoring, and the game went on and on and on. And then finally, Puckett puts the Twins ahead 4-3 on a 9th inning home run, and they win Game 6. No, actually, I take it back. It was not the 9th. It was the 11th inning he hit a home run. It was one of the 4 extra inning games that went on and on and on. In the 11th inning, he hits a home run, sends him to Game 7, and of course, Game 7 is the iconic Jack Morris 1-0 game, and that which also went 10 innings, by the way. And this was just the Game 6 and 7 were just the pinnacle of this World Series. Every game was a 1-run game, and you were sort of rooting for both teams to win because they were these sort of 2 ragtag teams. And the Braves, as the 90s went on, were great, but this was when they were just starting to come out of their last place doldrums, and guys like Smoltz and Glavine were coming up, and Terry Pendleton. It was before they got Maddox. It was the beginning of the run of those really great teams they had in the 90s, but they weren't really well known. And neither were the Twins. So what are these 2 teams doing in the World Series? And it was just so evenly matched. It was just it was just so tense.
And what is especially interesting though is they were carried by their star.
Yes, they were. Yeah, yes.
That's not usual in playoffs.
Right.
You would think they were. I mean, Yaz did in the '67 World Series, but usually it's some guy that just happens to strike it rich.
Aaron Boone.
And maybe not all you folks know that, but David Ortiz wears number 34 in honor of Kirby Puckett.
Yes, he does.
That's why he wears it.
And little Red Sox note of that game, coming in out of the Twins bullpen and pitching 3 shutout innings that game, Carl Willis, their current pitching coach. He was a member of that Twins team. But if you ever want to watch a great World Series, go back and just watch all 7 games of the 1991 World Series. It is absolutely the best World Series ever played between two teams that you didn't want to see either one of them lose.
Right.
It was so evenly matched. It's a brilliant series.
You know, you always want to watch a World Series if your team is in it.
Sure.
Or a team
Yeah.
you like is in it.
Yeah.
Neither of these teams had a myriad fans.
No,
You know,
not at
so
the
they were
time.
able to play with everyone being objective about watching the games,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is unusual.
And you're right about the star because you look at that Twins team. They had Scott Leyes and Gene Larkin and all these sort of nobodies that just had these career years out of nowhere in 1991, and they went back to not being very good the next couple of years. It was just sort of a one-year fluke shot that they had at that World Series.
So anyway, here's the clip.
Yes.
And Kirby Puckett unfortunately passed away at a very, very early age. But while he lived, he was the spirit of baseball. And the proof also that you don't have to be a big guy to be a star pro athlete. It's one of the things we like best about baseball.
Sure.
He's to the line and the left-hander delivers. Puckett swings and hits a blast. Deep left center, way back, it's gone. The Twins go to the 7th game. Touch 'em all, Kirby Puckett. Touch 'em all, Kirby Puckett. And the Twins have won this game 4-3 on a dramatic home run by Kirby Puckett. He's just now getting to the plate, and he touched it amidst all his teammates, and the Twins win the game.
All right, number 3. October 15th, 1988, and this is unusual because it's the first game of the World Series, which you wouldn't think would have an iconic moment in it. This was between the mighty Oakland A's, and I mean mighty. They won 104 games, and they beat the Red Sox by 15 games. The Dodgers had won 94, and they were lucky to beat the Mets in that series because the Mets are a much stronger team.
Sure.
They edged them out, and so Oakland was heavily favored. Los Angeles only batted .248 as a team for the year. They did have Oral Hershiser, who was 23-8, so he was their only hope. That was the season he went 59 consecutive scoreless innings and held the record. But they had picked up a fellow named Kirk Gibson from the Tigers that year. Gibson was a scary dude. He had been a star all-10 football player and looked it. He ran the bases sometimes. I remember one game, he hit a ball off the wall in Detroit against the Red Sox. They threw out the runner, and as the runner was being tagged, he dove over the pile and tagged plate. So he came in after a guy had not scored and scored himself. It was like this kamikaze guy coming flying in.
He looked like he always got to the park by raft. He always has long hair and scruffy beard, and looked like he just came out of the woods or something to play the game.
He's still around as a manager, but in those days he was just a wild man, dude, a big guy, probably 6'5", I would say. And Oakland had these guys called the Bash Brothers, which were pretty well known at the time, Canseco and McGuire, who have gone down in infamy since then, but at the time, there were 2 guys that just hit home runs. They were massive people, and they seemed to be odds-on prohibitive favorites. And they also had a closer named Dennis Eckersley, who is a Hall of Famer, and at the time was, I think he had 45 saves that year, so it seemed that was an unstoppable combination. Well, here comes the first game. Gibson, toward the end of the season, had 2 terrible knee injuries and also a sore hamstring. So he's going to have to miss the series. And that was one of the few hopes that the Dodgers had because he was the star of the team. He was the only power that they had. Well, the game goes along. It starts out with a home run by Mickey Hatcher, of all people. The Dodgers take the lead. But in the very next inning, Canseco hits a grand slam. The only hit he ended up getting in the series.
Only one.
And McGuire also only had a single hit, so the 2 Bash brothers ended up with just 2 hits in the series. But the game moves along. The Dodgers managed to tie it up in the 6th inning, so it moves along. I'm sorry, they don't tie it up. They get to 4-3. Game goes into the 9th. Eckersley retires. Eckersley comes in. And you don't know, some of you remember how he threw. He was just this never threw a ball.
Yeah.
It's just strike after strike after strike after strike. His Moss was flying in, his long leg kick, this scrawny guy firing the ball in.
Go like this when he struck you out, he'd point at you.
He was intimidating, let me tell you. And so he gets the first guy out, he gets the second guy out, and Mirabile Dictu, he walks the next guy. Now, Bob Costas was covering the team down by the dugout, and he could hear in the background, down in the batting cage under the stands, somebody grunting. Whoa! Whoa! They send Gibson up to pinch hit. Now Gibson can barely walk to the plate. He takes a couple of swings badly, fouling one off. After the second one he fouled off, he sort of walked 4 or 5 steps down, and up in the stands, good old Mel says, that's probably the furthest he can run. And the next pitch comes in, and I still don't understand how he did it. He sort of hit, it looked like he was hitting up off the ground a
It was
little
like
bit.
one-handed swing.
One-handed. Now, he was a strong man.
Yeah.
And the right field stands was not really that deep. But he managed to loft one into the stands on no knees and a bad hamstring. And it had to be something right out of the natural.
It really
Something
was. It really
you
was.
can't believe that it happened.
Yeah.
It lofted and Eckersley just stood there. And you can see the close-up of his face by that time
sure.
the camera's there. Just totally stunned.
Like, how
This
did he
ball
hit
could
that?
How did he possibly hit like this pitch out of the park?
Yeah.
And he's... If you remember Bill Buckner playing in '86,
Yeah,
he
it's
had the
this,
same kind of this hobbling, Mr. Dillon coming
Yeah,
around,
yeah.
coming around, and when he gets past second base,
Yeah.
they're following him now. Like
Yeah,
the camera.
sure, yeah.
He does this
Yeah.
pull like
Yeah.
this a couple of times, and the place just went nuts. Tommy Lasorda came out of the field having an epileptic
Oh,
attack,
God, yeah.
screaming and yelling.
And Vince Scully says, it's the iconic call, I don't believe what I just saw.
I don't believe what I just saw. And it was only one game. But it was just such an improbable moment that this guy, this crippled man, could come out and win the ball game. And it was one, like I said, there were only 3 that had been hit when the team was actually behind. And the Dodgers went on to win in 5 games. It was such a moral victory for that team.
It was his only at-bat in the series.
Only bat, never batted again.
And I remember at the beginning of the game, Costa saying that the Dodgers lineup was the worst he'd ever seen by a World Series team.
Terrible, 248
Look what happened.
average. So anyway, this is a great
moment.
Great one.
But the game right now is at the plate. High fly ball into right field. She is gone. In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.
So I hope you enjoyed that. So this is game number 2 on our list of iconic home runs, and I don't think there's much debate about what number 2 and number 1 are on anyone's list right now. But we'll dive into number 2 here. Took place on October 23rd, 1993. 1993 World Series, Game 6. And all I need to say is Joe Carter. So, but the little bit of background, which is really interesting how they got here. And the Blue Jays had won the World Series in 1992, and they were back, which was no surprise. They were, people forget 20 years later, that they were the premier team in the AL East in the early 1990s. They had just built the Sky Dome, and they had all these great players like Ricky Henderson and Paul Molitor, and Jack Morris had all come over sort of as mercenaries to help Dave Stewart, to help the team get a couple championships. And on the other hand, we had the 93 Phillies, who again had gone from last to first, I should say. And they were sort of these ragtag bunch of guys who looked like they were on the Plumbers Union softball beer league team on Saturdays. There were these scruffy, long-haired guys like John Kruk and Pete Incaviglia.
Stop right there.
John.
He still is.
Yeah, he still is like that. But John Kruk was the ultimate player on this team. But Pete Incaviglia and Mitch Williams and Darren Dalton and all these scruffy tobacco-spitting guys that looked like like derelicts from the biker bar next door. But they were good. good. And in the NLCS, they actually beat the Braves. The Braves won 104 games that year. And again, sometimes circumstances are out of your control. They beat the Giants, the Braves did, by 1 game in the division that year. The Giants won 103 and didn't make the playoffs. Right. So the Braves had to expend themselves just to win the division. And that was key. And that's how the Phillies knocked them off in the championship series. The Braves' rotation was all out of whack. And they had some great pitching performances from Curt Schilling and a bunch of clutch hitting. And the closer, the great Mitch Williams, it was spearheaded the bullpen. And he had over 40 saves that year, but if you've ever seen the movie Major League, if you remember Wild Thing, he was sort of this guy. He'd get the job done. He didn't blow many saves. It was modeled after him. It was, yes. Yeah. And he got the job done, but it was not a pleasant experience how he got the job done. It was always guys on base, and he threw so hard he would fall off the mound. So if anyone ever just wrapped the ball up the middle, he had no prayer of ever fielding it. I don't know why they didn't bunt on him more often. But anyway, heading into Game 6, the Blue Jays lead the series 3-2. They're ahead 3-1 in Game 5. Curt Schilling pitches a shutout. And this is when Schilling was just coming into his own as an ace pitcher. And he completely saved the Phillies' bacon in Game 5. So Game 6 rolls around. The Blue Jays have a 5-1 lead. In the 7th inning, the Phillies, as they always did that year, came back and they took a 6-5 lead and held that lead till the 9th inning. And in the 9th inning, out of the bullpen comes Mitch Williams, who the Blue Jays had crushed 2 other times in that series, and it was very clear that he just had no bullets left in his arm. He had thrown just serious high leverage innings all year. And, of course, the ultimate leadoff man leads off the inning, Rickey Henderson. And what does he do? He works a walk, of course. So, I think Molitor maybe got a hit that got him to third. So there were 2 guys on with 1 out, and Joe Carter comes up, and Carter crushes one into left field. So the Blue Jays go from a 6-5 deficit to an 8-6 lead and win the series, all in one shot. And there's this iconic television call of "Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run than that." And again, we're talking about the cameras. He's going like this as he's rounding the bases. The Sky Dome is going nuts. The Sky Dome drew 4 million people that year, so that was the place to be. Toronto was sort of the center of baseball then. And the teammates just mob him and pick him up. And again, you see Mitch Williams kind of hanging his head with his mustache and his mullet and walking off the field. And, to his credit, to this day, Mitch Williams totally owns giving up that home run. He said, "Oh, yeah, people say I was tired. Of course I was tired, but you know what? Everybody's tired in October. It's my job to get the guy out. I didn't do my job. What are you going to do?" He completely owns it to his credit.
The thing you got to remember is a walk-off home run is always at home.
Always.
Always.
Yeah.
So the crowd is going to go berserk.
Yeah.
It's not like any home run, walk-off home run in the regular season, which might be an away, can't be an away game.
Well, yeah, but
it's always a home game.
Yeah.
So this, though, was one of the only 2 walk-off home runs that won the series.
Won the series.
So it's the ultimate walk-off home run. You cannot top that.
And interestingly, that was, until this season actually, that was sort of the downfall of the Blue Jays, because the strike happened the next year. And until this season, when they're going to make it, they actually currently had the longest playoff drought. Until this year, they're finally going to get in. They hadn't been to the playoffs since 1993. And so it's also a moment emblematic of actually both Canadian teams, of how the strike really affected both of them, because the Expos were really at their pinnacle in 93, 94 too. And it's great that Toronto's coming back. I mean, if the Sox aren't going to win it, I want the Blue Jays to win it.
Over 2 decades since a Canadian team has been in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable to think about that. But that's just, if you've ever, the thrill of victory is just iconic. Joe Carter's face as he's coming around the bases.
And when you see this clip, watch the way he almost doesn't make it around first base.
Right.
He's sort of jumping up and down and on the base, and the coach is saying you have to go around.
Yeah, right, yeah, you have to keep going. So
enjoy.
Here's a pitch on the way, a swing and a belt, left field, way back. Blue Jays win it. The Blue Jays are World Series champions as Joe Carter hits a 3-run home run in the 9th inning, and the Blue Jays have repeated as World Series champions. Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life.
Joe Carter with a 3-run homer.
the winners and still world champions, the Toronto Blue Jays.
Okay, number one. This is regarded probably as the greatest game ever played. No, I don't think anyone would contest that.
Yeah.
It was played in October of 1960. Now, two things about this. First of all, they played a day game. Back in those days, there was no night games in the World Series. And the thing about it that I'll talk about in a minute is that they didn't used to groom the fields the way they do now. Now, you go to Fenway, every 2 or 3 innings, there's a whole crew that come out there, they spit polish everything, they change the bases so they be clean. They didn't used to do that. The fields by the end of a ball game were a disaster. I remember in the Bobby Thompson, famous Bobby Thompson, there's more paper than grass showing on the field. And so Pittsburgh had a notoriously bad infield. It was bad anyway after it was groomed, and then it was groomed again for the rest of the game. So there were lots of pebbles and holes all the way through.
This is the old
Forbes Field, the old
yeah.
Forbes Field, which was a miserable ballpark. But in any case, what was interesting about this is that in the game, there were 7 past or present most valuable players.
Yeah.
Imagine that,
Amazing.
7 in one series. The Yankees had just won their 10th pennant in 12 years under Casey Stengel. Extraordinary run. And the Yankees were such heavy favorites, there was no book taken at Las Vegas. I don't think it's ever happened before. So, strangely though, they split the first 6 games. Listen to the scores.
Yeah.
The Yankees won their 3 by these 3 scores: 16-3, 10-0, and 12-0. Whitey Ford pitched 2 shutouts, 10-0 and 12-0. The Pirates won their 3 games, 6-4, 3-2, and 5-2. So the Yankees had scored 46 runs, and the Pirates had scored 16 going into the last game.
And it was tied.
It was tied. It was like the Yankees was so much better, it was hard to believe. Well, and they ended up outscoring them in the series by 30 runs and still lost. Well, anyway, Game 7 comes around, and Pittsburgh, strangely enough, scores 2 runs in the first and 2 runs in the second. So you jump out to a 4-0 lead. In the top of the 5th, Bill Skowron, who was always a World Series hero, hit a home run, so made it 4-1. And then Yogi Berra hit a 3-run homer, and the Yankees got 4 runs to take a 5-4 lead going into the 8th inning. In the top of the 8th, the Yankees get 2 more. So now the score is 7-4 going into the last of the 8th.
It gets really crazy.
It should have been all over. Pirates managed to get a run, managed to get another run, have a couple men on base, first and second base. A batter hits an easy double play grounder right at Tony Kubek.
Yep.
You might know him, he was a famous broadcaster later on.
Sure.
The ball hits a pebble in the infield and hits him squarely in the throat and ruptures his larynx.
Yeah.
His mouth fills with blood, and when they went out to check on him, they were afraid they were going to have to do an emergency tracheotomy right there on the field.
Yeah.
So instead of getting a double play, the bases are now, there's 2 men on base, and Kubek is out of the game. Hal Smith, a second-string catcher, comes up, and it's a 3-run home run, and puts the Pirates in 9-7 going into the 9th inning. Pittsburgh is going berserk. We're actually going to beat the dreaded Yankees. What do you think occurs? The Yankees tie it up at the top of the 9th.
Of course.
So it's now 9-9 going into the last of the 9th inning. A fairly journeyman second baseman leads off. His name's Bill Mazeroski, and he's hitting against Ralph Terry, who was one of the Yankee stoppers.
Sure.
He hits the second pitch over the left field stands, which was no mean poke in Forbes Field. A 20-foot wall. Yogi Berra was playing left field.
Yeah.
Yogi Berra is seen circling in dismay as the ball goes over the wall, and the Pirates win the World Series 10-9. It was just a most improbable possible win by an improbable possible guy. And in the clip you can see, which is interesting that we even have this clip. In those days, TV stations did not hold on to the video once they shot it. They taped over it. Well into the 70s this was the case. Bing Crosby was one of the owners of the Pirates. He couldn't stand to watch the game live because it was so tight. So he actually flew to Paris, and he and his wife were listening to the game on the radio in Paris, and he had hired a company to make a film of the entire game. 49 years later, when they are remodeling his home where he had lived, in his wine cellar, they discovered the kinescope of the game. 2009, they discovered this game, and that's the way we're able to watch the clip now. There were some shots taken for newsreels, but not the entire game. So it's one of the oldest surviving full games ever on TV.
And there's even post-game footage too. You can
right.
see Mazeroski holding the ball after the game.
And as you see, the fans are pouring onto the field,
Oh, yes.
waving at it,
Yeah.
but they didn't block him, so he's able to score.
Well, a little while ago, when we mentioned that this one, in typical fashion, was going right to the wire, little did we know. Mark Ditbar throws. Here's a swing and a high fly ball going deep left, but they do it. Back to the wall goes Berra. It is over the back home run. The Pirates win.
What it amounts to, too, is when he came eligible for the Hall of Fame, he got 6% the first year of the writers' vote. But later on, because this has become such an amazing moment, not only to win the World Series, but to beat the Yankees at the same time when the Yankees had arguably one of the great teams ever assembled, and was able to do that, a Veterans Committee did vote Bill Mazeroski into the Hall of Fame. Without that hit, he's a nobody. With that hit, he's an all-timer.
He was a defensive person more than
Strong,
anything else.
very good
defensively, but not much of a hitter. But because of that moment, he's in.
Mickey Mantle says the only time he ever cried in baseball when they lost that game. And Casey Stengel was fired for not winning the World Series.
Yes, he was.
After winning 10 out of 12 pennants. Stengel said afterwards, "Oh, my big mistake, I'll never turn 70 again." He said, "My mistake was turning 70.
Little did he know we'd go on to the Mets and see all kinds of stuff that would make him turn even older than that.
1962's Mets team was the whole story.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's our clip of the greatest World Series playoff game walk-off home run.
Hopefully this whets your appetite a little bit for the playoffs coming up too.
So to conclude, here's our trivia
answers. So the answer to question number 1, who has the most postseason home runs of any player ever? And you know him very well, Mr. Manny Ramirez. Because people remember him mostly with the Red Sox, but he had some great years with the Indians beforehand and with the Dodgers after he left the Red Sox. He was in the playoffs almost every year for about 15 years in a row. Tons of at-bats, great opportunities, and a great clutch hitter.
He had 27 postseason home runs, which puts him head and shoulders above everyone
Not
else.
even close. I think the next one's 5
And
now.
he did have a walk-off series home run against the Angels.
Sure he did. Yep, sure did. And the answer to question number 2, the only 2 players who have 2 postseason walk-off homers. One, you may have guessed, is Mr. Big Papi, David Ortiz. And the other one you might have forgotten is Bernie Williams. And in fact, he did one of them against the Red Sox in the 1999 ALCS. I can still picture Rod Beck hanging his head as he's walking off the mound after giving up the home run to Bernie Williams. So congrats if you got those questions right.
So, this has been our last, we figured we'd do 9 shows for 9 innings in baseball. It's been great doing these shows. I hope you folks out there in Channel 9 land and Fitchburg land have enjoyed these, and YouTube land. And so, Jake, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation.
Co-host. Enjoy the playoffs, and we'll see you all anon.
next season.